So the next ability we're going to talk about is clairvoyance. The title of someone actively using the ability is called a clairvoyant. The category that the ability falls under is sense-based abilities. Its primary manifestation is images, pictures, and even like movie clips or video running through the mind. The definition of the word clairvoyant is actually two separate words. The word clair, which unfortunately most people translate into the word clear. And if you talk to anyone with the ability, they will quickly tell you there is no such thing as clarity with these visions, with any ability using that word. So clair really isn't accurate to translate to clear. It's much better to translate to the word beyond. And then of course, voyance just deals with anything dealing with vision. So a clairvoyant is anything dealing with beyond vision, beyond the physical aspects of vision itself. So unfortunately, clairvoyance is one of those words that we have to be very careful with, because people use it interchangeably with the word psychic. And even though they have no clairvoyant ability, they'll call themselves clairvoyant. And so for you, that's kind of important, because of course, if you're talking to someone who claims to be clairvoyant, when what they really mean is psychic, then they're not going to be able to help you develop clairvoyance, because that's not their ability. By the same token, if you're looking at someone who's claiming to be clairvoyant and you're thinking that they can deal all the psychic arts, that's not going to help you either, because they're specifically clairvoyant. So unfortunately, that word itself, you kind of have to be a bit careful with, because it's easy to kind of get lost with. So clairvoyance itself is a very specific, defined ability. And basically what's going on, like I've said before, is that you're getting images that you then convert into information, into understanding or learning. And that's the basics, but there's a lot more to it. What's really going on is that it's a way to translate. What's happening is you're getting the image or video for a specific defined reason, that something about that has a specific meaning for you. And of course, it may not always be apparent what that meaning is, but that's really what's going on, is it's giving you something to work with that will lead you to the exact word, idea, or even concept that is presented by the images. And of course, no one ever said you just get one image and that's it. You could get a series of quick flash, flash, flash of images that then create almost a story. That's not uncommon with this kind of ability. But the key point to that you got to remember is it's about translating those images, about taking those images and turning them into information or knowledge. And unfortunately, it is very specific based. It's all based on you. The images are coming through you after all. So one of the problems that people tend to get in with clairvoyance is they look to other people to interpret the images for them. And it's not going to be very accurate when you do that, because of course the images is yours. Even if you're reading for someone else, it's more common that the image will be about you specifically than about them. And it's just trying to find that image that just connects to that idea somewhere inside your mind. And unfortunately, usually it's the unconscious mind that the image is being generated from. And so it may take a while to kind of bring it up consciously and convert it into something usable. And that's not uncommon with this ability too, that you'll get a quick flash that's over in a fraction of a second, and then it takes 2 or 3 minutes to kind of think it out and process it through before it finally makes sense. And it's also not uncommon to have that aha moment, that light bulb turning on, that everything just finally clicked into place kind of feeling. And that's why, is because everything basically finally clicked into place. So those are things you need to understand, because of course, if you're trying to fight the meaning or looking to someone else to give you the meaning, it's going to be garbled or inaccurate. And so the trick is really to spend time just trying to figure out what the meaning of it is, because at the end of the day, that's the key element of clairvoyance. It can be used in other ways, but that's really the whole big point behind it. Now, one of the things that most people have trouble with clairvoyance is trying to understand sort of the boundaries that it falls under. And I look at things like if you're getting images of the future, for example, that has absolutely nothing to do with clairvoyance. That's a whole other talent and skill that we'll get into more in the future. So that's not what clairvoyance is. The key element that I generally recommend when dealing with clairvoyance is here and now. If you get an image that relates to something that's going to be happening even in a minute from now, that likely isn't going to be clairvoyance. That would be more intuition kicking in, or maybe an overlap of the two, but isn't itself going to focus primarily on clairvoyance. So that's not what it is. It's always generally about right now, exactly what's right in front of you, what's occurring at this exact moment. That's the key that you should be looking for with clairvoyance. So if you're trying to interpret the future or trying to figure out it can be about the past, but then it's about how the past relates to now, not about the past itself. I hope that kind of makes sense. So the key element with it is now. That's just the biggest thing that you need to understand. Now, for most people, clairvoyance is actually a fairly easy skill to develop in some ways. It's by no means like simple, oh look, I did it. It takes a lot of practice, but as abilities go, it's relatively easy. And one of the reasons is because we use vision so much. For most people, it's the primary sense that dictates their life. And with everything else, the more you practice, the better you get at it. Well, if you have the ability to see, you pretty much practice vision every waking moment, right? And when you're asleep, dreaming can, of course, help augment and work out those muscles to develop clairvoyance. So it's a skill that we use so often that it's basically not that complicated compared to others only to develop that ability. So that's kind of important. But it's also important to remember that anything dealing with normal vision isn't clairvoyant. Clairvoyant is, again, beyond the normal, right? So if it's something within the normal field of your ability to see, that's not what clairvoyance is. And so it is a bit of a fine line between the two. As an example, I'm going to talk about blind people for a moment, because there's this assumption out there that people who are blind may not or cannot use clairvoyance, and that's not at all true. And it's really quite interesting, but people that have even been born blind or later became blind can actually be just as good or even better at clairvoyance. One of the things is, if you look at someone that had vision and then became vision impaired at some point, of course, oftentimes they're going to try and fight to regain that vision. And of course, they might develop clairvoyance to compensate for the loss of physical vision. And the idea that we have in fantasy stuff where this blind person can see just as clearly without their eyes, that is a clairvoyant talent. Again, because it's here and now. It's dealing with what's right in front of you, and the things you see without your eyes are right in front of you. So a blind person being able to see their environment without their eyes is a clairvoyant. Now, that doesn't, of course, mean that everyone that's blind is clairvoyant. A lot of blind people use techniques like mental mapping. What they've done is they memorize sort of the layout of everything, and they have a lot of tricks that they use to keep things in order, to remember where things are. And of course, the biggest one is making sure nothing ever gets moved. Because if it gets moved and they are not the ones that moved it, it's going to be trouble because they can't find it. They need help then, right? So mental mapping isn't a clairvoyant skill. It's just a really, really good memory skill. So that's not clairvoyant, just so that you understand. So those are all kind of important things, because the whole element is that clairvoyance is about now. We can use it to get a lot of ideas, but they're all directly related to the moment in front of us, right? If we're using a technique to develop it, we're looking at what's happening right now at that moment, not what's coming later. And that's the distinction that you should always keep in mind when dealing with clairvoyance, because if you're not, then you're getting away from clairvoyance. So that's clairvoyance. Hopefully that gave you enough information to understand what it's about. On to the next topic.